Good morning and welcome to Renew Canada's InfraIntelligence series. My name is Corinne Lynds and I'm the Content Director here at Actual Media. I'll be your moderator for today's discussion on mass timber coming of age. Before we get started, I'll give you a quick tour of the Crowdcast platform so you're able to get as much as possible out of today's great session. By now, you've probably noticed everyone checking in along the right-hand side with the chat feature. Please say hello and let us know who you are and where you're from. We're Canadians, so an update on the weather is always appreciated. Here in Toronto, I can tell you it's a bright and sunny, and we're expecting a high of 27 today. Right above the chat, you'll see an Actual Media icon. If you click follow, you'll continue to be updated on our InfraIntelligence series as new webinars are announced. And down below, you'll see a variety of information. You can see how many people are signed in to today's webinar. You'll see the polls feature where we encourage you to cast your votes. You'll also see a little green button that will have links to the speakers' websites, so be sure to check those out too. And most importantly is the Ask a Question feature. So please don't be shy about becoming part of the conversation. We'll do our best to answer as many questions as possible as we go along. This is our 6th InfraIntelligence webinar of 2021. Last month, we had a great conversation with Canada's nuclear experts about the development of small nuclear reactors and the key role nuclear power generation will play in getting us to net zero by 2050. And today, we're switching gears to focus on how mass timber as an industry is indeed coming of age. There are certainly some common themes to nuclear, with sustainability and industry growth being a couple of key questions I'm really eager to pose to our panel today. We have a lot to cover over the next hour, but before I jump in and introduce you to our panel, I would like to take just a few moments to acknowledge the many First Nations and Indigenous peoples of Canada as the original stewards of this great country. I'm here in Toronto, which is located on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. We all share in the responsibility of our natural infrastructure, and there's much we can learn from the traditional knowledge of the land, water, and yes, timber, that allows us to build projects that benefit all Canadians. All right, so let's get started and meet our experts. I'm going to begin by inviting each of our panelists to the screen. Once they're all on screen, I'll have each of them spend just a couple moments to introduce themselves and quickly tell us a bit about where they're from, what their role is, and what perspective they're bringing to today's discussion. First up is Jackie Trach. Welcome, Jackie.
Hi.
We have Andrew Bowerbank. I'll just give him a moment to get to screen here. Perfect. And then Patrick Chouinard is up next. Hello, Patrick. And then we have Vivian Manasc. All right, we've got everybody here. Perfect. All right, so Jackie, will you kick us off, please, with your introduction?
Sure. Jackie Trach. I work for PCL Constructor. I've worked for them for close to 30 years, which is amazing, and every time I say that. The last 19 years, I've been here in Vancouver, which is where I'm currently sitting in a sunny day here in Vancouver, thank God. Also going to be 27 degrees today. So my wealth of information that I'm going to share today is as a result of working on many projects. Recently, I've been working on a lot of design build projects, and one of my favorite ones was the Wood Innovation Design Center that was done for the province of BC, completed in 2012, which was the first tall wood building in North America at its time, which thank goodness, there's so many more that have happened since then. So that's where my wood experience really kicked off, and since then I've been helping PCL with many of their other pursuits across the country.
Great, thank you, Jackie. Andrew, how about you?
Sure. I guess probably tell you a little bit about the Canadian Wood Council. It does work a lot behind the scenes. So, the CWC is a national industry voice for wood products in the construction sector. In addition to the codes, standards, and engineering work that we do, we have a great program called our Woodworks program. It's really focused on education and outreach. And what I find fascinating is the size and scale of just the forestry sector itself. And our groups specifically, we represent some of the largest lumber groups in Canada, including the BC Council for Forest Industries, the Alberta Forest Products Association, the Quebec Forest Industry Council, Maritime Lumber Bureau. And we also have a close relationship with a group called the Forest Products Association of Canada, FPAC. So FPAC will take material from the forest to the mill, but the job of CWC, where I work, is to go from mill to the job site. So we basically have the sector covered. And what I find fascinating is right now the forestry sector contributes about $42 billion to the GDP. And our group specifically, the Wood Products Group, account for about 44% of that. So I think it's an exciting time for mass timber. And for me, I came on board here about 8 months ago only. And prior to that, I was a senior executive at two of the largest companies in the design and construction sectors. Also former CEO at the World Green Building Council, and spent some time advising Magna on electric vehicles, and council member at the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. But I mean, I tell you all this just to illustrate that I've been involved in a number of trends in the marketplace over the years. And Vivian, I've known for probably 15 years, so she knows a lot of this. What excites me is the rapid interest and uptake that mass timber buildings are having in the marketplace. We really are going mainstream. So to me, it's like following the trends that green buildings did about 10, 15 years ago, and the movement from BC right across the country. The same thing is happening with mass timber buildings. So new systems, new technologies, very exciting times.
Oh, I think, sorry, you were muted there. I think if I could read your lips, maybe I was next. Okay, very good. So my name is Patrick Chouinard. I'm the founder of Element 5. We are a mass timber manufacturer in the province of Ontario. We are Ontario's only mass timber manufacturer. We make CLT, we make glulam. I've been a proponent of mass timber for about the last 10 years. Where we are today in the industry is a realization of a dream that began about 10 years ago. There's a great business opportunity. There's a lot of great growth in the mass timber industry, but there's really a lot of opportunity for us to make positive contributions to the environment, to communities, to create these really healthy, wonderful, nurturing environments for people in which to live. We're just very grateful to be in the industry at this time, and looking forward to making positive contributions in this industry over the years to come.
Great, thank you. And Vivian.
Hi, welcome. I'm Vivian Manasc, Principal Architect at Reimagine Architects, formerly Manasc Isaac Architects. We've recently rebranded our firm and are becoming an increasingly global presence in the world of sustainable buildings. Our practice is based in Edmonton, Calgary, Bucharest, and soon to be Vancouver. So Jackie will be coming to say hello. And we're definitely have had the privilege of working with the sustainable buildings community right from the beginning. So I think both Andrew and I were involved in the very, very early days of the Canadian Green Building Council, of the LEED Green Building Rating System, of the introduction of net zero standards across the countries, and of course in the focus on mass timber. In fact, just recently, as part of our rebranding, we've also published our firm's social responsibility or sustainability report. And in flipping through that, over 75% of the buildings that we've designed are mass timber buildings. That's a fairly significant percentage. And we've been working across Western and Northern Canada primarily for the past 40 years, designing buildings that are healthy for people and for the planet. And mass timber has always kind of bubbled to the surface as being a priority for the kinds of buildings that we do. We really love to say that we live lightly on the earth, and that we're committed to a circular economy. And the sort of micro example of that is if you happen to be by our Edmonton studio, we have this fabulous tree table in the middle of the studio, and it's a table that actually came from one of our construction sites where sadly this beautiful green ash had to come down, and we managed to get it milled and dried and recrafted to be centerpiece in our studio. So we, I think, touch mass timber right from the very beginnings of our day right into our largest projects across the country. So I'm excited to be part of this conversation, and thank you for including me.
Thank you so much. I love that saying, we live lightly on the earth. That's great. I'm going to steal it for sure. All right. Well, it's been more than 2 years now, I think, since Renew Canada last sat down with the industry leaders to discuss the challenges and opportunities that mass timber was facing at that time. Looking back at that roundtable discussion now, I was struck by the emphasis of it being a lot on overcoming challenges. And today, there seems to be much more confidence in the industry. I was reading through some reports, and I came across the State of Mass Timber in Canada report that was just released by the Canadian government back in May of this year. And in its opening statement, it says, and I quote, "Demand for more sustainable construction materials and methods, as well as more sophisticated design and production systems, is stimulating the construction market in Canada. Mass timber will shape the future of low-carbon construction and develop the bioeconomy. Canada's forest sector is responding to this opportunity with innovation, products, and design." I mean, that's a pretty huge statement. What's happened in the last 2 years that's driving this optimism at such a great pace? This progress, and our webinar topic today is called Coming of Age. So I'd love to hear your thoughts as for our first question on what's happened in the last 2 years that's really driving this so immensely. Andrew, do you want to start?
Wow, put me in the hot seat first. Holy smokes.
Sure, it didn't have to.
Well, we work very closely with NRCan in the creation of that report. And, we're able to, since we are the industry voice, we're able to really bring a lot of information and leadership and knowledge to the table. And just watching the marketplace grow, there's a lot of factors contributing to it. Obviously, the economic benefits, the environmental benefits, you're looking at low carbon building opportunities and design, but there's also the biophilic principles too, the healthy indoor environment. People love to be near nature and near natural products. But what we're seeing, we've got some really hard numbers where we do a lot of reviews in the marketplace of the way things are moving in the marketplace. And up until now, just even with the pandemic, we've already been involved in over 247 projects across the country, and we now have 614 new projects that we're working on and we're tracking. We've so far put in about $200 million worth of wood products into the construction sector, accounting of almost 14 million square feet of construction. So the pace is really picking up dramatically. And I think, Patrick specifically can probably attest to these kind of numbers. And the way Ontario is really picking up and taking the leadership from BC, Ontario is going to be moving very fast in the near future.
That's great. Excellent. Maybe that's a good to hand to you, Patrick.
Very well. Yes, there's been a huge uptake in the last 2 years. In fact, it's been progressing over about a 10-year period, but certainly a lot of progress over the last 2 years. I would say we're seeing a lot more projects. In Ontario, there are 25 or more large projects in various stages of design, development, or construction, and we're inundated with new project opportunities on a weekly basis. So certainly an uptake in new projects coming to us. Ontario now has a mass timber manufacturer. We're also seeing other manufacturers coming on stream. Kalesnikov, Smartlam, Structurelam has a new manufacturing facility that's going to come online, I think, in August of this year in the United States. We're seeing a lot more architects and engineers who now have experience in mass timber design and engineering. We're seeing a lot of growth in education. The Mass Timber Institute is now part of the Daniels Faculty of Architecture at the University of Toronto. A little plug for the Canadian Wood Council. They have this wonderful program called Wood Smart, which is supporting post-secondary institutions, educators, and students in architecture and engineering. We're starting to see stronger links between government, industry, and regulators, and soon we'll see the adoption of the National Building Code in Ontario, and just a lot more opportunities for, us as Canadians, and I'm sure there's Americans on this call as well, but us as Canadians to take a leadership role in this industry that influences what's happening into the United States.
Perfect. All right. How about you, Vivian? Would you like to jump in next?
Well, I think the emerging trends really do relate very much, as both Andrew and Patrick were saying, is that, it's very much about increasing acceptance, right? I mean, we've been advocating for mass timber buildings for a long time, and there used to be a lot of resistance, partly within the engineering community, partly within the construction community, and partly within the owner community. And so little by little, people are saying, oh, wait, there's good precedence. And I think that what really happens in the world of design and construction is people look to precedence. And so once there's 10 buildings they can look at, it's easy to do the next 100. And once there's 100 buildings you can look at, it's easy to do the next 1,000, right? It's the first ones that are hard because there aren't enough precedents to satisfy people that this actually works. And I remember years ago we used to, often illustrate and bring to our clients and our communities European precedents. And often, the answer was, well, yeah, that's great, but this isn't Europe, right? And so people are looking for local and regional precedents of buildings that make sense. I think, honestly, the credit does go to the Canadian Wood Council as well for advocacy and for supporting communities for awards programs and other means by which wood buildings have been put into the forefront. And I think that's also made a difference in terms of accepting the idea that wood is really a great material. And of course, a lot of the research that's been done that shows that wood doesn't burn any faster than other materials and so on, right? So a lot of the fear factors have been removed.
For sure. And Jackie, how about you from the contractor's perspective?
Yes, I would agree completely. Our initial exposure to mass timber was as a part of a competition where the province had set out a RFP to say we want to make the first tall wood building, and a lot of us didn't have the experience. And it's been interesting to watch all the publications that have been issued since that time, which is as a result of all of our experiences. And I think this entire mass timber community is very open and sharing of knowledge and want to make this product a more user-friendly and viable product and a cost-effective product, because it really is, when you start comparing it to schedule and everything else. When it gets complicated is when they have the hybrid versions where you have a lot of the hybrid content of a mass timber building. That definitely does make it a little bit more complicated from a contractor's perspective, because the beauty of wood is if you have one contractor assembling an entire mass timber building, it does have a very impactful event on the overall community and construction site. So I really appreciate that and that experience. So I think Vivian's comment associated with the more projects that get built out of mass timber, the more comfort level us as contractors have that it can be done. We're always seem to want to look at the ones that were done well and such. So I think, Vivian, you hit the nail right on the head. That's part of what we're all here for, is just to support the mass timber industry as well and get more projects put out there and built.
Yeah. There was an update to building codes, I think it was early last year, allowing mass timber structures to be built as high as 18 stories. Has that also had a significant impact, or is that old news now? Any takers?
I can jump in on that one to say, that code has just come in. It's still brand new. Okay. It hasn't had an impact yet. I think it will, although the unfortunate part is that most of those tall buildings have to be encapsulated, so you can't see the wood, and that's sort of unfortunate. I mean, we would love to see the next iteration of the code where you no longer have to encapsulate the wood and you can actually show it, because to Jackie's point, like if there's one trade that completes the entire structure and it's done and it's beautiful and it's finished and you don't have to come back and add drywall and other things, then life is good. Right? Economically, it's good. Aesthetically, it's good. And sustainably, it's less materials is a good thing. So I think from my perspective, I'm waiting for the next code. I think this code is a good stepping stone, but I don't think it's going to make a big difference, because I don't think that many people are going to be that excited about wood if you have to still encapsulate it.
Right. Yeah.
I can talk a little bit about how the code is likely to impact the industry going forward.
Yeah, great.
So certainly the changes to the building code will allow us to construct buildings in wood that would otherwise have been constructed into, with concrete and steel. So it means, greater proliferation of wood buildings across various building typologies. That's also going to foster investment in innovation, research, development, testing, and the introduction of new and complementary engineered wood products. So it's going to force us to be much more, creative about how we use wood to address the needs of those larger buildings. As we become more knowledgeable and experienced and challenged with taller buildings, it allows us again as Canadians to assume a leadership role toward, in this mass timber revolution and impact the growth of this industry on sort of across North America and nationally. Lots of stimulation to the economy. It's going to mean job creation, more benefits to the environment because, there's going to be more buildings out there that are sequestering carbon, and we're going to be able to create these better living conditions for building occupants, families, and communities.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I think if you're looking at, just to follow what Patrick was talking about innovation, I think if you look at design and design, form follows function, where I think code then follows form, and it's the confidence around that. If you look at some of the amazing projects, most people online might be aware of things like the Glulam and CLT products. If you're not, it really is worth taking a look at the level of sophistication and innovation that's in some of these products. You have span joists spans are just going across full Olympic style pool stadiums and things like that. It's very impressive. We have an awards book that we put out every year, very successful, and we've done it for the past decades. And this year, the submissions to the awards is more than we've ever had. And the sophistication of these products are really demonstrating the competence that the industry has across design through to construction in these products. So I think we're going to see some game-changing movements soon that, very soon code is going to have to catch up to the passion and the interest that we're putting up in the marketplace.
That's fantastic. When we were speaking on one of our test sessions earlier, Vivian and I were chatting a little bit about geographic perspective. Being in Toronto, we think we're in the center of the universe a lot of the time, but obviously we are not. So are we seeing more mass timber infrastructure being embraced across the country in more rural areas? Is it still in more city centers? Is it within Indigenous communities? I've certainly seen a strong influence there. And I don't know, Vivian, if you want to jump off on this one first off, since it was a topic we were discussing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we work, as I mentioned, a lot in rural and remote communities, as well as in urban centers, of course. And definitely our First Nations communities have long since been the leaders in wanting wood buildings, in advocating for wood buildings, and in supporting the construction of wood buildings. So many of the schools that we design on reserve, as well as other community facilities, cultural facilities, community hubs, most of them are all wood buildings. And it's because, of course, as we talked about, that sense that wood makes you feel good. It's a living material. It's healthy. It's sustainable. It's beautiful. It makes the building come to life. And so I definitely say in rural and remote communities, that's very much alive and well. And as our engineering community becomes more capable, and as our construction community becomes more capable, there's less and less resistance, or less naysayers, less people saying, "Oh, you can't do that. It's not possible." So, and of course, in our Indigenous communities and in remote communities, people also love wood because it's a material that they can also repair or modify. Right, and it's a material that they're comfortable working with, and there's many carpenters in the communities, and so it's a strategy that works well through the life cycle of the building.
Maybe I can comment as well. This mass timber revolution began in Europe 30 years ago and landed on the shores of BC about 10 years ago, but we've seen the wave of the use of these materials spread all the way across Canada and now well into the United States. So there's a big uptake in the United States as well. Huge uptake in Ontario. Andrew alluded to it earlier by saying that, Ontario is likely to take a stronger role in this whole mass timber movement, simply because of the sheer volume of projects that are in various stages of design and development here, in the location that Ontario is where it's situated to be able to sell right into the central part of the United States and the whole eastern seaboard. An interesting thing about Indigenous communities, and we're seeing that already. We've been involved in a few projects with Indigenous communities already, and there's some challenges specifically associated with developing housing and communities for Indigenous communities that are benefited through offsite manufacturing, and there are limited trades available in a number of these remote communities, and the fact that you're prefabricating buildings in a factory and shipping them to site, you're less dependent on trades that may or may not exist in those areas. There's short building cycles, so when you ship a prefabricated building that can be quickly assembled in those locations, you can build more buildings quicker in shorter periods of time. And many of the homes that Indigenous communities are exposed to are made with structures that don't really sustain the harsh conditions well. And when you're building with mass timber, it's a much more durable product. So you have these buildings that have a longer lifespan, that they can pass from generation to generation. So, offsite manufacturing and the use of wood makes a huge difference for the growth of Indigenous communities.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. All right. The topic of climate change continues to grow in prominence, and I know we've already covered it a little bit, but it's more and more difficult to ignore the massive carbon impact of buildings, which account for nearly 40% of global carbon emissions. Is a greater focus on embodied carbon going to drive this industry forward as we strive to achieve net zero? And for those joining today that maybe aren't mass timber experts yet, quick definition. So embodied carbon is the carbon dioxide emissions associated with materials and construction process throughout the whole life cycle of a building or infrastructure. Who would like to tackle this one first?
They probably all could. It's a little bit
yeah, and you're all welcome to. So
a subject all dear to our hearts.
Exactly.
Right. Absolutely.
All right. Well, Andrew, why don't you start then? You seem like you're ready to go.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because coming at this from now in the wood product sector and seeing the evolution and the way things are moving so quickly, but then also kind of pulling back to my green building days and all the work that we did there. It's interesting how it's moved, because the perceptions of green and sustainable and low carbon, it tends to move around based on what elements we have to tackle. And about 5, maybe 10 years ago, it was always around operational emissions and carbon and energy efficiencies, and the materials were all around containing and locking in the temperatures and the indoor air quality and things like that. Now it's really about the material itself and the embodied carbon that's sequestered inside the materials. Every industry, every material supplier is trying to figure out their way to solve these problems. There's EPDs now being required around the world, and Canada's catching up to that. Environmental product declarations are called, so basically standardizations of the types of the carbon that's sequestered in the materials and things like that. But I think we also look at the stages as well, and where the efficiencies and the carbon reductions can be made. It starts early in design. And Vivian knows this. The early stage design, you must plan for this. It's integrating with the codes and standards with BIM technologies as you're designing it, and making sure that your carbon is accounted for in that process. But then it's also the construction work as well. And how do you manage the carbon reductions when you're building some of these massive buildings? And I think, Jackie, from a construction perspective, you understand this as much as anybody else, that the process it takes to build something like a hospital or a school, the time is just as important. If you're pouring concrete and building with steel, these are labor-intensive things. But if we can take a product like mass timber, assemble it and build it in a factory, and then ship it to site for a prefab modular system that goes up very quickly, we are automatically reducing the carbon during the construction process. And I spent quite a few years way back actually working with NSERC at the federal government and also the Brickworks in Toronto to develop their carbon neutral building. It wasn't a wood centric building whatsoever, but we used that project to actually create a carbon tool to track emissions during construction. And that was eye-opening. And just being able to take that experience and apply that now to what wood can do for construction and for buildings, we have so much still to learn and understand about that process in its entirety, but it's going to be a fun ride to figure this out.
Excellent.
Yeah, I might just jump in there and say, embodied carbon has been a conversation really since the very beginning of the green building movement. And I remember working with Wayne Trusty and the Athena Institute, who were working on ways to calculate embodied carbon in building materials. And way back at the beginning, we started to talk about the fact that we have to account for the carbon at the early design stage, as Andrew was saying. It's really at the beginning when you're making the key decisions as to, what is this building made out of? How is it going to be assembled? Those are the moments at which those critical differences happen. And once those decisions are made, and they're often in the first month of the design of a project, they have ongoing impacts for the next 100 years. And so it's really critical for us as the design team, architects, engineers, client team, contractors who are involved in that early design stage, to be part of the solution and to say, we have to be doing that calculation along with doing calculations for, how much load does the building take and how much force is going to be applied by the wind and the snow. We have to be looking at the climate impacts right at the very beginning as part of our normal design process. And when we do, wood comes out ahead almost every time, because it does have such a benefit from an embodied carbon perspective. There are a few other materials out there that are, in that category of far lower embodied carbon, and those are materials that are being privileged at every turn.
I'd like to comment as well. The world is desperate for solutions to climate change, and the concrete and the steel industries are responsible for somewhere between 12 to 14% of the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere today. We know that we can't continue to build the way we've been building for the last 100 years, particularly as population is expected to increase from 7 to 9 billion people over the next 35 years. And just to understand the sequestration benefits of wood, when we're building with wood, we're leveraging our forests' natural ability to absorb carbon dioxide, produce the oxygen that we breathe, and store the remaining carbon in the form of wood. So if we're using wood to build things, in this case buildings, what we've done is we've created unlike the concrete and steel industries that are responsible for spewing all this carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, to one which systematically and effectively removes it from the atmosphere and stores it in the form of these beautiful buildings. So there's a huge environmental benefit associated with building in this way, and I think it's the wise, responsible way of constructing buildings in the future.
Excellent. Jackie, I can see you nodding along there, I think in agreement.
Yeah, I just want to, I worked with Michael Green on the Wood Innovation Design Center, and he would do these talks with educating everybody about mass timber, and he's a great speaker. And one of the items that he spoke about that just resonated with me was that the building that we had built, which was virtually 100% mass timber, other than the slab on grade was concrete. Everything else was mass timber. It was one of those innovations where if it could be wood, it was wood in this building. Everything, stairs, elevator cores, everything was made out of CLT and glulam and such. And one of the things he described is he had calculated the whole carbon in capturing, and then the question associated with sustainability. And he said the wood we used to build this 6-story building was replenished in a total of 15 minutes by the Canadian forestry industry. It just replaced itself in 15 minutes. For me, that resonated how different mass timber was to the concrete and steel industry that we've all been talking about, because there is no replacement associated. You continue to take minerals and product out of the ground and just put it in buildings, and then it stays there, and then you have to do something with it after its end of life. Whereas with a mass timber building, you can actually disassemble it and use it and repurpose it to something else, which is kind of very unique to the mass timber industry. So it really changed my mind about a new product that was truly innovation innovative in its every form.
Great.
I think there's one more element I think that we need to keep our eyes on, and we haven't had to tackle this yet. It's going to be the next generation that's going to be on this from a sustainability standpoint, and that's the deconstruction of buildings. To deconstruct a steel or concrete building, very labor intensive, huge amounts of product waste. But when you deconstruct a mass timber or any type of wood building, all of that wood can either be repurposed or reused or recycled. So being able to understand that, especially from a deconstructibility and a reuse application in future systems, there are buildings in Asia and Japan that I know specifically that are 500 years old. The durability and be able to maintain their life, but then knowing that those can be deconstructed for generations and generations, that alone is a sustainability message that that future generations are really going to be talking quite a bit about. So that'll be exciting too.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. I'm just going to do a quick jump into our ask a questions here. I've noticed we have a question here. The technology is there, the interest is high, but are developers and other property owners asking for wood? Is the demand on par with steel or concrete? And that seems like a fitting question for this part of the conversation.
That's for Jackie, I think.
I have seen a trend where there is certain clients that are very interested in the sustainability of the buildings, and lately it's been a lot of the institutions like the colleges, the universities are really, and the First Nations areas that are really interested in providing that or responding to the challenge of being carbon neutral, net zero. So I have seen a lot of interest in that way. Private developers are still having a tough time moving towards mass timber because their mindset is concrete and steel, and the bottom line sometimes overrules the use of mass timber when it comes right down to it. With more and more fabrication and quality of installers and experience levels going up, I foresee that the comparison between the two there won't be a comparison anymore. I believe that mass timber will eventually become the more preferred product, but it's a function of starting out early and seeing what the client's motivation is. If it's purely just to build it and sell it, that's one thing. But if they're planning to keep it for a long time, that's a whole different look. And you have to work with the clients, with the architects, the engineers, and see what their motivation is. How much of the mass timber can be exposed versus how much do they want it to be exposed? Because that all adds to the bottom line cost of a project. So it is a bit of a unique conversation early on. And Vivian, you probably have had these conversations many times. Mm-hmm. So we're on the same side. We would like to build them out of mass timber, but sometimes they end up being hybrids or completely a concrete and steel building after the fact. So
I'll comment on that as well. There's the mass timber industry is revolutionary in many ways. It's changing the way buildings are designed, delivered, assembled, etc. It's also changing the way projects come to market, and where traditionally as a manufacturer, supplier, our primary target were architects and engineers. They'd own the customer relationship and they'd orchestrate solutions, and we were treated really just as a supplier. But what we're finding now is our primary target are owners and developers. We're seeing a huge uptake in interest by owners and developers, and what offsite manufacturing and wood offers them is the prospect of generating a higher return on investment. The fact that we're able to manufacture buildings in a high-tech environment means that we're able to manufacture those buildings for less than they would be produced traditionally, where they're being assembled on site rather than constructed in the traditional sense. And we're creating this absolutely beautiful new strain of buildings where we're seeing wood exposed, and people who are buying these buildings or renting in these buildings are willing to pay a premium for them in order to be in these wonderful spaces. So for the owner developer, it's lower overall cost but a higher selling price or rental price. So they are our number one target in terms of, the people who are going to be driving this industry going forward.
All right, before we hop on to the next question, I'm just going to remind everyone to jump in and respond to the poll questions. I'll give you a moment or two to do that, and then we can do a quick check and see what's happening there. So the first question we have in here is, what is mass timber's most appealing benefit? And right now, sustainability is leading with 81% of the vote. I don't think there's too many surprises there based on our conversation to date. And then the next one, what is mass timber's greatest obstacle? And right now, building code compliance with 50% of the vote is leading, but there's also some thoughts around supply chain gaps and cost. Anyone on the panel like to respond to this?
I think a lot of the recent explosion in the wood market from a costing perspective is probably, I'm sure, Andrew, you've seen the cost of wood go up as well, just like everybody else. It is a commodity.
Yep.
And it is hard to predict where it's going to be in the planning process and the building process. So, yeah, I'm sure that's part of the concern on the costing side of things, because it is based on a commodity pricing and it's not always fixed.
For sure.
It's amazing how much things like this pandemic has impacted all supply chains, right? It's not just wood. I mean, wood is really being brought to the forefront because it traditionally has been a cost-effective solution for building and easily accessible material. But when simple little things like if the pandemic hits and people are locked in at home, they start looking at their home and saying, let's do renovations. And next thing you know, people are like buying product like crazy, and the supply chain is only as big as it originally intended to be and can't really respond as quickly as we'd like it to sometimes. Well, the good news is that we are catching up, and I'm already starting to see reports where pricing is starting to right size a bit. I don't want to speak out of turn. I'm not an expert in the area of costing by any means. We have a lot of people on teams that can do that. But I think, we're going to see the economy all across the board starting to rebalance. And I think we're also going to see an increased surge of interest as we get through all this stuff.
In my mind, there's three main drivers of the mass timber industry. And as I've referred to already, I think first and foremost is the developer community and the prospect of making a higher return on investment. These are the organizations that control the supply chain. The prospect of a higher return on investment is really driving the developer community towards this. Second of all, there's the huge environmental benefit and the desire for us to all build much more responsibly and more sustainably. There's also the building occupants, and as I think, Andrew, as maybe you had referred to, the biophilic advantages. Health studies are showing that there are benefits associated with living and working and educating our children in buildings where there's exposure to higher wood content. So we're creating these wonderful, healthy environments, and so I think fundamentally it's the human desire to be able to connect with our space. If we're as cities densify and population increases, we're becoming farther removed from our natural environment. So building with wood allows us to bring nature into our living and working environment. So those are the three major contributors, I think, that are fundamentally driving this industry. There's some challenges, of course. I think the biggest challenge in my mind is the stereotypical perception of wood. The beliefs that wood burns, it doesn't last, it's more expensive than concrete and steel. We're depleting our forest and destroying our environment. Well, there's a lot of research that addresses all of those concerns very well. So some key drivers but there's still some challenges that we need to overcome, and it's about experience, education, and we'll see it all. The industry evolve dramatically over years.
Perfect. We have another question here from our audience. How is mass timber going to work in smart buildings with Internet of Things and sensors, or IoT?
Well, I would say that in some ways, wood buildings are better than steel or concrete buildings because they don't, steel and concrete have, or concrete including steel, I guess, has resistance. So radio frequency transmission resistance. So sensors are usually quite happy to penetrate through wood. And so I don't think that wood is anything but an advantage on if you're trying to integrate more sensors in buildings. And I think there's also a lot of the need for sensors might be also less in a wood building. And I think that's an analysis that hasn't really been done yet. But I dare say that there are many advantages in a wood building where the things that you use the sensors for in the first place might just not be required.
I think it's also about systems thinking too. What I mean by that is, I'm still recovering a little bit from the Sidewalk Labs Waterfront Toronto project at Quayside. I was very much integral to the beginning stages of that with Waterfront Toronto. But Sidewalk Labs and Google, they see the value. They wanted that entire project to be mass timber, and it was also high performance. It was autonomous vehicles. It was the full community system of healthy environments, smart technologies that really play together. So I think it's an evolutionary change that's taking everything into account, not just smart, not just high performance. It's everything kind of all together. And I think that's going to be some of the real strategic solutions going forward, is full integration of ideas.
It strikes me that there are so many different avenues that are expanding in this market. As the industry grows, are there necessary training programs in place for all of this? I know we talked a little bit about Wood Smart, but are there other programs? Are there mentorships? Will we be able to scale up in terms of the number of people and the smarts that we'll need to tackle it all?
Yeah, well, that's what we do at Canadian Wood Council. We have a program that I mentioned early on called WoodWorks. Wood Smart is our program for the academic field and students, whereas WoodWorks is really about training professionals. And how do we make sure that they have what they need, the tools to move forward? So we have, for example, we give engineers and architects actually get credited courses, some of the credits for the courses that they take with us. We're publishing things on an annual basis. This year, actually, we've got some amazing publications coming out. We have our new wood design manual that our codes and engineering team are putting together. That's coming out soon, and that's really focused on how to, all the different code compliance issues and engineering requirements when doing construction and design. We have a new low-rise commercial book coming out. I think the low-rise sector is really ripe for mass timber. That's going to be very interesting. We've got a mid-rise guide for multi-unit residential buildings coming out this year. And, I mentioned WoodSmart. We have our new curriculum guideline for builders coming out at the end of the year. So, these are all massive publications coming together to educate everybody as much as possible. And we're ramping that up even more. So we've got a new business plan coming together specifically around how do we increase the value of our WoodWorks program nationally, but also within the different regions that are offering the program. Quebec, through their equivalent Secabois program, is amazing, the work that they're doing to educate the Quebec marketplace and how everybody across the country is working to elevate all the provinces. It very, very much is a collaborative effort of all of us working to provide that education needed.
Yeah, I was just going to comment that I know in Toronto, the Carpenters Union actually has additional training that they've set aside for erection of mass timber. And I do know that here in BC as well, that some of the technical institutes are seeking to set up a program for training, a trades program training as well. So yeah, it is coming. It is coming. Everybody's recognizing that the popularity is there, and certification is definitely something that as a contractor we'd be looking for as well.
Is this an industry that attracts a fairly diverse market? Or, I mean, obviously construction in the past is, and still is, quite male dominated, but are part of these training programs, are there also programs in place that are driving more women into the market, driving different minority groups, that type of thing as well?
I'll just say really quickly, I'm a bit biased. I have twin daughters, both going to university in September. One of them is going to Ryerson in engineering, and just the excitement on her face just to get involved in the STEM fields, getting into engineering. She's not sure exactly what area she wants to go into, but some of the young people that we're hiring and looking to bring on at the Wood Council is amazing. We've got a new person in our communications right out of university. She's doing wonderful. So I think the world is wide open for young minds and young professionals to really grab a hold of this and figure out the next play, because they're the ones that are going to have the brain on sustainability, but also leadership and equity in the workplace, which is going to be key. So I think we're going to break down a lot of barriers and a lot of walls in the coming decades. And I think sooner rather than later, the five of us on the screen are going to be the dinosaurs that have to step aside.
Fair enough. Awesome. I was going to ask earlier, Vivian, I would similarly to the contractor's perspective on this, but I know that 75% of the projects you've done have already got a focus on mass timber, but what is it that would drive architects to choose mass timber as the material of choice? Like, what can we do to, get more architects maybe doing 75% of projects in the same way?
Right. Well, I think it is a vision that many architects do share, the idea that, wood buildings are beautiful, are sustainable. And, the constraints tend to usually be economic. And so, they need to be hearing from their contractor colleagues saying, oh, yeah, no, it is affordable. It makes sense. And from our structural engineers. I think our structural engineering community has been slow to catch on to the design of mass timber. And, a decade ago, there were really only one or two firms in the country that could do a decent job of designing elegant, well-detailed mass timber buildings. And now that's growing, but it's taking a long time. There are definitely more, engineers, structural engineers who are familiar with wood. And the fear is always that it's too expensive. And so if we can overcome that fear with good data, and also to change the economic calculus and say, we have to count not just dollars, we have to count environmental impact, we have to count embodied carbon, we have to count energy use over the life cycle of the building. We have to look at the next 100 years because the buildings we design aren't for today. We're designing the future, and we're designing for that circular economy. And so it is really important that we change the framing of the short-sighted economics that we've been living with in the construction industry to looking at that longer horizon.
The cost is a very big issue, and I would say despite all the other influences that are driving the mass timber industry, cost is always the number one consideration, and costs have come down and they will continue to come down, and mass timber will continue to be more competitive. In fact, I'm confident underprice other forms of construction materials going forward. And so, for example, here in the province of Ontario, we've been in the mass timber industry for a number of years now. And we used to have to import all of our raw materials from long distances. We used to have to import it from Europe, or we'd have to bring product in from Quebec or from British Columbia. But now we are sourcing our materials locally from Ontario for us, so we're shortening the distance that raw materials need to travel. We now have a manufacturing facility in the province of Ontario where we can manufacture our products very efficiently, cost effectively. There's a growing market for the use of these materials in Ontario, so we're delivering our products locally as well. So that's driving down the overall cost. And so where the perception has been that, mass timber is more expensive, we're overcoming that perception by offering solutions that are competitive in the marketplace. And an example of that is, took on the challenge of creating a mass timber solution that was devoted to the affordable housing sector. And if you can come up with a mass timber solution that's competitive in affordable housing, then really the sky is the limit. And so we put a team together to bid on a particular project, in Ontario for the YWCA, and we went up against all the other guys that are doing, prefabricated affordable housing solutions, the concrete guys, the steel guys, even the light wood frame guys. And we came up with a mass timber solution that underpriced the entire market. So I think to some degree we've broken the barrier that mass timber is not affordable. And once we've done that, I think there's huge opportunity to be competitive in across a whole variety of different building typologies.
And I think, to back up both Patrick and Vivian's perspective, if you look at, the realities of costs and pricing, any sector you look at has gone through the evolution of supply and demand and costs. Before coming onto the Wood Council, I worked on the first net zero energy building in Ontario at Mohawk College. And the costing, the estimators, when we went in there at the design phase, it was about 12% premium. After going through building all of that, they said, if we were to do that again, it'd probably be around 4 to 5%. So it's the education of the people involved that's also of real importance in the process. It's not just the material cost, it's the knowledge and the cost of doing that. But if you remember and look at other sectors, flat screen TVs. I remember 20 years ago when they came out, to have one to watch a baseball game with your buds in the basement, that was $20,000. Now you go to Best Buy, you get one for $1,000. So it's also those kind of economies that we have to see when you have a new trend like this coming to the market, that these prices are automatically going to adjust, not just based on material itself.
Makes sense. Well, we're down to our last question, and I've got one for you that I think you can all use as a bit of a wrap up. So it sounds like a lot of we've done a little bit of myth busting in the last few years in terms of the flammability of wood and in terms of the durability, the strength, the cost now as well. So what are the remaining challenges or obstacles that we need to overcome for the industry? What needs to happen? And I'll give you each a minute of wrap up on that. Who would like to start?
Go, Jackie. Go, Jackie.
Everybody else wants time to sing.
I guess from my perspective, I think education. I think taking it to the building authorities, the inspectors, that is the next level of education. I think our architects and engineers are doing a great job of being innovative, but that innovative generates some concern from the authorities having jurisdiction on the approval process. So if I was to say what's our next hurdle, I think that group of individuals is somewhere where we could inspire them to ride the wave with us and agree that this is a great innovation that is worth pursuing and being supportive of.
Great, thank you. All right, Andrew, you're next on my screen, so I'm going.
Okay, I think it's going to be keeping up with the pace of interest and the pace of change. It's very easy for us to get complacent in what we know and what we think the market knows, but very quickly the tools and resources that we're delivering to the marketplace will be outdated because the education will catch up. And I think with the interest in mass timber, that's going to happen faster than we think. So I need to make sure that our teams recognize that and we're prepared to provide that next level of education as it's required. So it's a what I call like a test for myself to make sure we're on board with this going forward.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. And Patrick, you look thoughtful.
Yeah, no,
it always does.
Well, I'm, it's taken a while to get where we are, and change takes a while to come into effect. We're going to see the same thing in the mass timber industry. It's taken about 10 years to see this sort of snowball, gain in size, but now it's the snowball is quite large. It's in motion. It's rolling through certainly Ontario, well into the United States. So we're seeing a lot more interest in adoption. It's going to take time. Education is a really important component of that, and what the Canadian Wood Council is doing is going to impact the industry, I think, in a tremendous way. We're all just going to gain experience in this industry, and the industry just needs to evolve. But in my mind, there's no question that the wave of the use of these materials is upon us, and building in this way is the way of the future.
Great, thank you. And Vivian, it's up to you to bring us home now.
Okay. Well, I would say, just to add to what all the rest of the team have said, the other thing that remains is to really continue to focus on integrated design, because as we know, who have been working in the green buildings world and sustainability for decades, the key to success of any sustainable strategy is to make sure that everybody on the team really understands the win. And so, we've been talking a lot about structural engineering and about construction, but we have to remember that as architects, as designers, we have to integrate the work of our mechanical engineering team, our electrical engineering teams, as well as, of course, the structural teams and our. So it's through integrated design that I think we're going to continue to grow this community of practice around mass timber. And I think we really have to focus on that larger conversation, integrating everybody into this, into the values and into the ways that we need to do things differently to make this a success.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you to all of our panelists, and thank you to PCL Construction for sponsoring today's webinar. I imagine most of you are already pretty familiar with PCL, but I invite you to visit their site at pcl.com and click on Our Work to learn more about the projects that they've been working on. And another big thank you to all of our attendees today. Your participation through the chat, which has been just blowing up there on the right-hand side of my screen, that participation and through the chat feature and the poll questions really drives a level of intimacy in these events that's just not possible otherwise. So thank you so much for that. And join us again on July 29th for the InfraIntelligence Top 100 Progress Report, where we'll catch up with industry leaders to learn more about provincial and territorial pipelines and the impact recent funding announcements will have in pushing these projects towards completion. If you follow Actual Media up at the top of your screen, you'll automatically get a notification for your upcoming webinar. So thank you again, stay safe, and we'll see you next time.